guess what I heard the other day?
What, Leah?
Okay, so you know how, like, abuse, it's a touchy subject.
It
but
is.
I've heard abuse is only when it's violent.
You know, I wish that was actually the case, but physical abuse is just one type of child abuse. Neglect and emotional abuse can also be damaging to children. And since those type of abuses are more subtle, less people intervene.
Oh, okay. Well, then I also heard this other thing. Only bad people usually do it to their children, not people like us.
I mean, it's easy to say that it's only bad people who abuse their children, but it's not always so black and white. Not all abusers are intentionally harming their children. Many have been victims of abuse themselves, and they don't know any other way to parent. And others may be struggling with mental health issues or a substance abuse problem.
Wow, okay. Well, you know, like with the good thing, it doesn't happen to, like, the good families. You know, like those perfect families you always know.
Well, when you typically think of child abuse, you probably think of, impoverished families or families who live in bad neighborhoods, but it actually crosses all racial, economic, and cultural lines. And sometimes families who seem to have it all together from the outside are actually hiding a different story behind closed doors.
Really? Huh. This is interesting. So, do abused children always grow up to be abusers?
It is true that abused children are likely to repeat the cycle and they become abusers as adults, but they could be unconsciously doing what they experienced as children. On the other hand, many adult survivors of child abuse have a strong motivation to protect their children against what may have happened to them when they were younger, and they may be excellent parents.
Wow, okay. I'm learning a lot.
Hey Leah, you know that conversation we had the other day about debunking myths of child abuse?
Yeah.
Well, I kind of did some research and thought that we could be really productive members of society by learning how to determine what is abuse and what isn't. So,
yeah, that's really good to help educate the public and so we can see the signs.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing to think about when determining abuse is if a parent is constantly belittling, shaming, or humiliating a child. If they call them names or make negative comparisons to others like, oh, well, you're not as good as your younger sister, or I wish you could be more like Johnny.
Right, and telling the child they're no good, worthless, they were a mistake. I mean, that definitely can be, and like frequent yelling, threatening the child, and even bullying.
Yeah, or ignoring or rejecting a child as punishment, giving him or her the silent treatment, or limited physical contact with the child, such as no hugs or kisses or signs of affection.
Yeah, or exposing the child to violent or abuse of others, whether it be the abuse of a parent, a sibling, or even a pet.
Absolutely. And, we talked about the different types of abuse earlier, and determining physical abuse, you can look at, frequent injuries, unexplained bruises, welts, or cuts on a child. Also if the child is really watchful or on alert all the time, as if they're waiting for something bad to happen.
Yeah, definitely. Or injuries that appear to have, like, a pattern, such as marks from a hand or even a belt, and shies away from touch and flinches at movements and seems afraid to go home.
They could also wear inappropriate clothing to cover up their injuries, such as long-sleeve shirts on summer days.
Yeah, definitely. And, like, to determine emotional abuse, you see the child excessively withdrawn and fearful or anxious about doing something wrong.
Right. They could also show extremes in behavior, such as being really compliant or really demanding, or they could be extremely passive or extremely aggressive. As well, they, maybe wouldn't be attached to their parent or caregiver.
Yeah, definitely. Or acts either inappropriately of the adult taking care of the child, or, sucking the thumb at a age that doesn't seem normal, or throwing a tantrum at, like, the age of 13.
Sure, absolutely. Determining sexual abuse is kind of a tougher one, but things you can look out for are if they have trouble like walking or sitting, or if they display knowledge or interest in sexual acts that are usually inappropriate to his or her age, or even seductive behavior towards their peers.
Right. And makes strong effort to avoid a specific person without a certain reason.
Right.
And doesn't want to change clothes in front of other people, especially, like, participating in physical activities.
Right. Sometimes people who are under the age of 14 who have a sexually transmitted disease or they're pregnant could have been subjected to sexual abuse, or they also could have run away from home often. That's a warning sign as well.
Definitely. One thing we could definitely do is see the difference between physical abuse and discipline.
Right, that's definitely a hot topic. And I think one thing is unpredictability. That's something that separates, discipline from abuse. If,
Right.
the child never knows when the parent's going to be set off, or if there are no clear boundaries or rules, and the child's constantly walking on eggshells, not sure of what behavior will actually trigger physical assault.
Right, or lashing out in anger when the parent doesn't know how to control the anger and physically abuses just to assert control and no motivation to teach the child lovingly and carefully, and the anger of the parent is more intense with the abuse.
Right, and they could also be using fear to control the behavior of their child. Parents who physically abuse their children may believe that their children need to fear them in order to behave, which just isn't true. But they use physical abuse to keep their child in line. However, what children are really learning is just to avoid being hit, not how to behave or grow as individuals.
Right. And another thing to really talk about is to know whether you've crossed the line.
Right, like when a parent has gone too far. And something that I think about is, if I were a parent and I used spanking as, an act of discipline, if I were to start spanking my child, but then it turns into multiple hits and that are harder and harder, or if I shook my child, or if I threw my child down after spanking them, or if I found myself screaming louder and louder and I couldn't stop, then I think that would definitely have been crossing the line into abuse over discipline.
Right, and when you don't feel emotionally connected to your child, you just kind of distance yourself and you feel so overwhelmed to even deal with the child, like not doing daily activities with them, you just want to be left alone, and your child to be quiet and distant.
Right, and also if as a parent you think meeting the daily needs of your child just seems impossible. And there's a kind of a difference between, the normal stresses of parenting. Like, every mom or dad is going to be a little overwhelmed at some point. But, if you struggle with balancing, dressing, feeding, and getting your child to school and activities, and you can't continually manage to do it, then it's a sign that something could go wrong in the future, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And when other people start to express concern, something's definitely wrong.
Absolutely.
And you definitely want to take those into consideration. I mean, you don't always have the best perspective of what you're doing, so other people's is definitely something to consider.
Right, those are definitely things I think we can look out for, and we probably should make sure to tell other people as well so they can see when, parents are abusing their child versus disciplining them.
Right. I think it's something good to know. But what would emotional abuse look like?
Why are you wearing that?
It's Christmas.
I don't like it. Who are those presents for? Taking them back.
Why?
Because you're worthless. Your dad left because of you. Shut up, Marge.
It's Leah.
I don't care. I never liked that name. It's dumb. Did you guys clean yet, or are you too worthless to do that too? Let's just take a look. What is that? Is that dirt I see? Clean it up. Can't do anything.
But what about physical abuse? What might it look like for discipline to go too far?
Leah! There's a dent in my new car and your bike lying next to it. What happened?
I'm sorry. It was an accident.
I don't care if it was an accident. It costs a lot of money.
I'm really sorry.
I don't care.
A Child's Cry, a personal story of child abuse. If you have ever been the victim of child abuse, I can definitely relate. I was emotionally and physically abused by my mother until the age of 16. I felt a lot of the abuse was my fault, and that I deserved every punch in the face and every burn from the cigarette. I know now that none of the abuse was actually my fault, and that I didn't deserve any of it, but at the time, I kept it a secret from everyone. I hid the marks with long sleeves and jeans. I laughed until I cried around my friends when inside I was screaming, "Somebody please help me." I pretended to be happy and carefree in school, but always was thinking, please don't let the day end. My grades were good, they had to be, and no one ever suspected anything was going on. I dreaded going home. I walked slow, fear rising in my belly, wondering if I had completely finished all my chores before I left for school that day. I wanted to just keep walking, not head in the right direction, to turn around and run the other way, but the fear that wanted me to not go home was also a fear that said I had better get there. My father was oblivious to the abuse. He knew nothing until years later. He drove a semi-truck cross-country and was gone for weeks at a time. and when he came home, I felt the relief fall from me. The last thing I wanted to do was spoil our special moments with him and tell him what was going on while he was away. I was able to finally relax and have fun. His homecoming was always short-lived, though. Usually just a couple of days, and the dreaded knot of fear would begin to tighten as he began packing for another long period of absence. I hated to see him go. I was not allowed friends. The ones I had were in secret. They never called because I lied and said I didn't have a phone. There were no sleepovers. Again, I lied to my friends and told them my mother had bad headaches. Maybe next weekend. I didn't go to parties. Mom's headaches kept her from driving. No, I don't need you to pick me up. I'd rather stay at home and take care of my mom. I was always told by my mother, you go to school for one reason, and one reason only, and it's not to have friends. So I kept them hidden from her, and her from them. I ran away from home at age 15, but was soon found by the police. When my mother made it to the police station, she tore into me right there, and I yelled to everyone, to anyone that would hear me, "Don't you see why I don't want to go home?" They thought it was just teenage rebellion, and sent me home with her anyway. I got it worse that night. Worse than I'd ever gotten it. She sat on top of me and smothered me with her hands. I wanted it to work. I wanted it to end for me. She would let go just as things were getting dark, and then she would repeat it over and over. She spit on me and called me such horrible things a mother should never say to her child. She told me she brought me into this world and she would take me out of it. She wanted to end my life, and I wanted her to that day. I left at age 16 to move in with my father. I told him everything that had happened all those many years, and he cried long and hard and asked me to forgive him for being so blind. He told me he would never let anything happen to me again. I haven't been able to forgive her. Maybe someday, but not today, nor many tomorrows to come. I went through so much more than anyone should ever have to bear, and so long as I fear her, I can never forgive her. She will continue to haunt my dreams and cast a shadow over my life. I will never forget.
This anonymous testimony speaks to the importance of child abuse prevention. Know the warning signs and speak up.